All right, let's dive in. Today, we're digging into an analysis from the Hampton Institute. It looks at Dr. Cornel West's presidential campaign not just as a race for the White House, but as a kind of mirror, one that reflects the deep, deep cracks in the American political system. Let's get into it.
So this whole conversation kicks off with one big announcement. On June 5th, 2023, Dr. Cornel West, the famous public intellectual, throws his hat in the ring for President of the United States. And that announcement, well, it's the jumping-off point for everything we're about to explore. But the source material we're looking at today, it wants us to look past the breaking news alerts and ask a much bigger question. What does a campaign like this actually mean for working-class politics in America? That's really the core question guiding our entire discussion today. So to figure that out, we're going to follow the author's train of thought. We'll start with what makes this campaign different. Then we'll look at this idea of a sheepdog lesson from past elections. We'll get into a profile of Cornel West himself. And then we're going to zoom way out to talk about elections and class struggle before landing on a totally different idea of what winning could look like. Okay, first up, a new candidacy. The author makes the case that West's campaign isn't just business as usual. There are a few key things here that, in their view, make it a pretty major departure from what we've seen lately. So the author points out a couple of really big differences. For one, West is running as a third-party candidate. That's a huge, explicit break from the Democratic Party. The source thinks this could open the door for the most openly working-class campaign we've seen in a long, long time. And in doing that, it could totally challenge that common idea that the Democrats are the left wing in America, just by showing what a different kind of left might look like. But to really get where the author is coming from, especially their skepticism, we have to rewind a bit. The Bernie Sanders campaigns in 2016 and 2020 are seen as a really important lesson here, a lesson the source calls the sheepdog lesson. So what on earth is a sheepdog candidate? Well, according to this analysis, it's a specific political phenomenon. It's a candidate who gets the grassroots all fired up with talk of radical change. They build up all this incredible energy, but then at the end of the day, they turn around and herd all those voters right back into the arms of the mainstream Democratic Party. And this isn't a new idea. It was spelled out really clearly way back in 2015 by the late Bruce Dixon from the Black Agenda Report. He argued that the whole point of a sheepdog candidate is to make it seem like there's a real chance for change inside the Democratic Party, which keeps people from leaving to build something new. The author uses Bernie Sanders as the #1 example of this theory playing out. Think about it. In 2016, his campaign was this massive grassroots movement, but he ended up endorsing Hillary Clinton. By the time he ran again, some folks were raising questions about his foreign policy. And then in 2020, the same pattern, another powerful run, followed by an endorsement of Joe Biden. For the author, this history is a big, flashing warning sign. Okay, so with that whole sheepdog idea in our back pocket, how does the author see Cornel West himself? The article doesn't paint a simple picture. They present him as a really complex figure, what they call a mixed bag, with some really promising signs and some, well, pretty problematic ones. And this slide really breaks it down. On the promising side, you've got his anti-establishment street cred, right? He's not a career politician. He backed a third party back in 2016. He wasn't afraid to criticize President Obama. And he has these very strong anti-imperialist stances on issues like Palestine and NATO. But then you look at the problematic column. The source points to his 2020 endorsement of Biden as a major compromise. They also bring up his appearances on places like Fox News, his support for the ADOS, or American Descendants of Slavery movement, and what the author calls anti-communist talking points. So yeah, not a simple hero narrative here at all. All right, now we're getting to the absolute core of the Hampton Institute article. The whole analysis shifts here from talking about one candidate to questioning the entire idea of elections inside a capitalist system. And this brings us to the author's huge central question. Can you actually achieve real fundamental change by playing the game, by participating in the existing electoral system? The author calls this system bourgeois elections, which basically means elections that happen within the rules of capitalism. And the author's answer? It's a hard no. They argue the system is working perfectly, exactly as it was designed to. They even paraphrase one of the founding fathers, James Madison, to say that the whole point of the U.S. political system was to protect the rich few, the opulent minority, from the democratic power of the working majority. So, to really get this argument, we have to understand this key term, bourgeois democracy. As the source explains it, this isn't real democracy for everyone. It's a system that looks like it's about freedom. You get to vote, you have rights, but underneath it all, the real power, the power to control society, stays with the capitalist class.
The author draws this really sharp contrast between the appearance of democracy and what they see as the underlying reality. So on the surface, sure, we have constitutional rights, the right to vote, but the reality, they argue, is that capitalists control the things we need to survive: jobs, housing, you name it. We have a legal system, but who has the time and money to actually use it to get justice? That's why this source calls these systems manufactured dead ends.
Now, you might be thinking, hang on, what about things like the New Deal or the Civil Rights Movement? The system gave concessions then. Well, the author tackles that head on. They argue those days are over. Why? Because capitalism itself has changed. They point to the rise of what's called neoliberalism. Think deregulation and pro-corporate policies, and the fact that giant monopolies are more powerful than ever. In this view, the system is in such a constant state of crisis that it can't afford to give anything back to workers anymore. It can only take more to keep itself going. So, if winning the election is impossible, and the system is designed to not give in, what in the world is the point of even running? This brings us to the final and maybe the most provocative part of the entire analysis: redefining what winning even means. And here it is, the author's big idea. From this perspective, a successful campaign has nothing to do with getting the most votes. A successful campaign is one that uses the national spotlight of an election to do three other things: educate people about the real reasons for their problems, agitate for massive fundamental change, and organize people into real, lasting movements. And the source even lays out a kind of playbook for how this would work. It all starts with education, using the megaphone of a campaign to raise class consciousness, to explain how things like capitalism and imperialism are the root of the problem. It means being openly socialist to show a real alternative, and it means focusing on class instead of getting bogged down in divisive culture wars. From there, it's about explaining fascism as a symptom of a dying system. And maybe most importantly, the author says a campaign like this has to use its momentum to build actual, independent institutions, things like food programs or health clinics that are run by and for the people, completely outside of government control. So after all that, the Hampton Institute analysis leaves us with this one giant question. Is a campaign like Cornel West's going to be the start of a totally new kind of politics, one that's all about educating and building independent power? Or is it going to end up as another familiar dead end, just one more sheepdog that leads all that energy right back into the system it's trying to fight? The source doesn't give us an answer. It suggests that's the question we have to watch unfold.